We're about to keep this thing going. We have our first round of Microtalks coming up. As you can see, they're taking care of business over here. Basically, we have our friend Xalavier. He's going to speak to us for a little bit. He's going to share his wealth of knowledge and expertise with us. And remember the rules. Loud round of applause for our friend up here.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Xalavier Nelson Jr. As the giant screen behind me says, we have a lot to get through very quickly, so I'll get right into it. I tell a lot of puns on Twitter, so here's my Hall of the Damned. We're such good friends already, I want you to see it. I've worked on a lot of things across a lot of genres in a very short amount of time. I've worked on a XCOM-inspired Afrofuturist wildlife management RPG called We Are the Caretakers, Hypnospace Outlaw, which was nominated for a bunch of IGF awards, Skatebird, which is Tony Hawk, but birds on skateboards. And Karen Droid's Prey, which is a itch bestseller and is being showcased right in the exhibit hall. I have bylines everywhere from Polygon to PC Gamer, where I was the only columnist for the PC, for the print magazine for 2 years. I do RPG stuff. I talk at events. I do absurd games at events with names like Jeff Goldblum is concerned about academic progress, and he must tend to his managerial genital immune abominations. That's an actual thing I did in an actual phrase I just uttered on stage. And what I'm here to ask you, to beg of you, is to reuse everything for the love of God, because we've got a stigma in our game culture, a toxic idea that reusing content, assets, ideas, even concepts is somehow lazy or less deserving of praise than building something from sweat, blood, and tears right from scratch. A perfect example of how our culture reacts to this kind of thing is found in the open world shooter Far Cry 4. Ubisoft spent a lot of time making an open world map in a mountainous region of a fictional country called Kyrat, and they reused that base map to make an entirely new game called Far Cry Primal. They turned it from a modern day open world shooter to a caveman action adventure. It's got different progression systems, voice acting, cinematics, a completely different context, and yet people call this an asset flip. So before we go any further, let's define what an asset flip actually is, because this is a term that's thrown around very often without much thought behind it. An asset flip is the theft of proper credit. It's producing new executables from source game creation and asset packages with little to no context and modification, usually for a commercial game. It's downloading a package from Unity and renaming the package, exporting it, and selling it. That is very different, however, from most usages of content that are done again. And I think a perfect example of this can be found in pretty much every other medium, including film. Are the movie directors the first lazy devs? That same newspaper has popped up in over 100 productions, from No Country for Old Men to Scrubs. Are those shows, movies, productions morally bankrupt because they don't make their own newspaper every time? Extract the wood pulp from a tree and print it with their own hands? No, of course not. We wouldn't say that for anything else. Music has sampling. We don't walk into the recording booth and say, does anyone know what a song is? And yet, that's frowned upon in our industry. Content reuse is intentional. It's the modification of previously built assets, technology, and content, whether you buy it or it's custom, in order to achieve a better, cheaper final product with a distinctive style. You can make games faster, better, and cheaper reusing assets. And we have actually hundreds of examples to pick from for people who have done it, are doing it, and how it displays a future forward for our industry, especially for people working on budgets, especially for people working in indie, people who are marginalized, who don't have millions of dollars to throw at making a new cup every time they make a game. Because gotta do that, right? New cups. Warframe stuck 4 of those guns together and called it a jetpack. They took shipping containers, stuck it to the edge of a rectangle, and said, that's a ship in the air. You're not close enough to notice. It doesn't matter. Destiny, the 7 of 9 gun, which works on bosses, doesn't work on this boss, because what they did is they took a spider tank, put boss flesh on it and just called it a new boss. And it's great. It's brilliant. It's ingenious. It works. And in the back end, it's still just a vehicle walking around wondering what the hell it is anymore. In Hypnospace Outlaw, we couldn't use more than 200 images at a time because our engine is Construct 2. So what we realized was that GIFs are actually just a bunch of images stuck together. So we took all of the images in the game, stuck them into GIFs, and made it so we could freeze on a GIF, and we built all the content from that. And we are the caretakers, the Afrofuturist game I work on. This looks like a totally original scene, but it's actually an intelligent use of bot store assets, lightly modified, and original content to build an entirely new context. This is valid. This is needed. And yet our industry frowns upon this because of an inappropriate privileged stigma. Race the Sun, best-selling game across many platforms, uses 8 shapes to build its entire world. In June's Journey, the narrative people had to create new chapters and had no budget to make new stuff, so they just used the characters they had and built new storylines around them. They couldn't even change the animations. So there's a brother of one of the game's previous suspects and her niece's headmistress who end up falling in love, and they only have idle animations, so she never puts down her book, he never puts down his pipe, and they ended up being the most popular couple in the game. Scribblenauts uses a template for all their animations. Majora's Mask, let me go back a bit. Majora's Mask uses the Ocarina of Time assets to create a horrifying hellscape. Elder Scrolls Skyrim uses bookshelves, pushes them into the ground, and calls it tables. In Friday the 13th Killer Puzzle, they had to create a heart that gets torn out of a body because Friday the 13th, but they didn't have the budget to make it, so they shrunk down a baguette, turned it red, covered it with blood, and suddenly it's a heart. Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, they just mirrored the entire map. They just took the GameCube version, flipped it so that it would face so you could fight with your right hand instead of your left, and they released it again. This is Nintendo. Also, by the way, thanks, Nintendo. Hot Tin Roof uses doors for everything, including slidings. AC Liberation uses a placeholder animation to have a person distract a guard by doing a chicken dance. Telltale, may they rest in peace, put a mustache on a guy from their original game and called them Leonard Steak Charmer, and suddenly they have an entirely new character for Sam and Max. Everybody does this. It is necessary. It is needed. Our medium is unique in that with the combination of codes, with code and custom assets, we can build entirely new things on familiar formulas. And yet our audience, many of whom are not exposed to the realities of game development, expect new assets every single time because they're through privileged parties, they're shown that this is the only way, that this is the better way, that in fact anything else is laziness. And we as creators have to push against that by intentionally reusing the things we make and buy to create better games faster and cheaper. Forget asset flips, forget fears of looking lazy. Everyone does this, including Nintendo, thank you. Reuse everything and give yourself that many more chances to bring your original visions before the audience that deserves them. Because it only takes one to land. And the more time you spend in making original things with reused parts, the more chances you have to make your visions a reality for the people who need them. If you want to talk about making better, faster, cheaper games, that's how you can contact me. Reuse everything, for the love of God. Thank you.
Keep it going for Xalavier Nelson.
Give me a second. Do my thing.
If there's one thing that I learned, it's that I have to P. Diddy everything. Reuse, remix, sample, all day, every day. I respect that.